This is a home automation Quik Byte. In this Raspberry Pi series, we proudly present the blinking LED. The ingredients for this digital recipe are the Raspberry Pi with power adapter, a light-emitting diode, a 200 to 300 ohm resistor depending on how bright you want the diode to be, and connecting wire. This is a top-down view of the Raspberry Pi. On the right is a 40-pin connector. The 40 pins all have different uses, as you can see in the diagram. Today, we're interested in two of the pins. On the left is the positive GPIO 4 pin, which is pin 7. And on the right is the ground pin, which is pin 6, which will be the negative. Here is how we're going to connect the Raspberry Pi to the LED. The LED has two pins. One is shorter than the other. See the packaging to determine which is the positive anode and which is the negative cathode. The positive, using the red wire, will be connected to pin 7 on the Raspberry Pi. The negative gets connected to the resistor, depending on which size you want. A smaller size resistor will make it for a brighter light, and a bigger size resistor will make for a dimmer light. And that will be connected to pin 6. Now that we have everything connected, let's move on to programming. There are different ways to program the Raspberry Pi. My preference is with NodeRed, which is an easy-to-use graphic program that is installed usually with Raspbian already, so you don't have to go and install it. To use it, you go to the address of the Raspberry Pi, :1880 on your browser, and then you will get the window that you see here, which is the programming window. On the left, you have the different modules or symbols that do different functions. And that's what you choose and drag them out to the middle window. And then you connect them together using digital wiring to get your outcome that you want. On the right is the properties window. We had clicked on the Fire symbol on the left, which is an inject node used to send messages out so that it can be transmitted to other things. And depending on how you use it, you can either just press it to inject this message, or you can have it, as in this case, repeatedly at a certain interval. Here it's 1 second. Go and trigger out a message. The message goes from the Fire inject node over to the middle node. That's a trigger node that triggers it for 750 milliseconds. And on the right hand, we have the GPIO symbol. It's going to pin 7, which, if you remember, we connected the positive lead to. And on the bottom, we have a message payload receive debug symbol so that we can actually see the messages go through if we want. We're actually going to wire this up in the next part. Let's explore how we put the programming together for this blinking LED. We're using NodeRed, and if you haven't used it before, you can go to NodeRed and learn more about it. It has its own website. This works on three things. One being the left side here has all the nodes that you need to create what's called a flow. A flow is a bunch of nodes tied together by these little wires, little gray wires here. And the message flows from left to right. So this system is actually working right now to blink the LED that we had soldered together in the last section. So what's happening here is that a message gets sent from left to right, what's known as the NodeRed message object. An object is a bunch of variables put together in one package. So, and they're put together as what's called a key value pair. So you'll have all messages usually have payload, which is the key, and then it'll have the string or Boolean or any other JavaScript type variable to go along with it. So in this case, we're opening up the Fire node, and on the right shows the properties of the Fire node. What is that? Well, on top it tells you what type of node it is. It's an inject node. We use it to send the signal along, to start it along. So we can either do it manually by pressing this little blue button on the left of the node, or in this case, it can go automatically by filling in where it says repeat here, and it says interval, and here every 1 second it will send out a message. What message is that? Well, we're using the payload that we had discussed before, and we're going to send a string. When it says A to Z, it's a string, and it just says fire. It doesn't really matter what it sends in this particular case, because the next symbol along is going to see that it received something and do something. In some cases, it does matter, as we will see. So we'll go into the next symbol here, and this is a trigger symbol, and you can find it here on the list here and drag it out. And this trigger symbol has properties just like the other one did. So here it's going to send a true, which is a Boolean. It could be true or false, or 1 or 0. It's going to send a 1 or true, wait for 750 milliseconds, so that's 3/4 of a second, and then it's going to send a false. So it's going to send a 1, wait, and a 0. What's going to do when it hits the 1, the GPIO will turn on the LED, and when it hits a 0, it will turn it off. So this is what makes it blink. And here is the third node here. This is the GPIO node. Look at that. And as you can see, we've seen this symbol, this legend before of what are the nodes. Now remember, we connected ground and we connected to pin 7. So you see pin 7 is selected. That's where we're sending the high and the low that's coming from here, the trigger signal. And now you're wondering, what are these green symbols? If you look on the left here, it's called a debug node. And what it does is just shows you what is coming out of the different nodes that you connected to. So here, I call it out of fire because this is connected to the fire, just like the trigger. And we want to know what's coming out of it. You can tell it's constantly blinking fire. It doesn't show anything else because it doesn't go to a different state. It's always sending out fire every second. So that's why you see it here. Most of the time, you'll look at it here, and on the right-hand side, we have different little tabs on the bottom. The left is the info about the node, and then the next one is the debug window. And we're debugging the current flow, which is this flow here, because you debug all the flows, and then you get tons of messages. And then whichever one you want to do, let's clear it out. And we have out of fire. We see, what's coming out of that? We can click the activate button, and we see, that's what's coming out. You see it's fire, fire, fire. We'll shut that off, clear it out. And now we'll do the trigger, which you can also see on the bottom here. We had set it up so you can see it there easily. But you can see it goes true, false, true, false, true, false. And that's what's being sent to pin 7, as you can see right below the nodes. It shows what it's sending. So if we really want to make it ourselves, instead of relying on this already made thing, I would put in an inject node. Then we'll need a trigger node, which is here under function. See here, trigger. We'll pull that out. The default is 250 millisecond. That may be pretty quick for to be able to see. So we could do, let's say 500 in this particular case. So it's gonna, here we could leave it as a 1. We'll set the 1, 500 for half a second, and then after that I'll set the 0. And that's all, and that's the end of it. Until it gets another input from the fire node. Here it just says timestamp. It says timestamp because by default the inject node just sends out the timestamp. But you could put anything you want in it. You see all the variable types that you can use. So I could just set a timestamp, and then here we're going to go all the way to the bottom. We got GPIO out. You can go in, you can go out. There's several nodes there. And this one, and then we want to. Now, one thing, you see it has the little triangle. That means it hasn't been filled out. Just in case you look around and don't know why something's not working, you can say, oh, triangle. There's some missing information. So here, the only information we really need is which pin to send it to. And you see the triangle has disappeared. And now we can connect them together. You just go from these little gray boxes and just drag the little wire across and across. And then what we'll do here is if we click here, actually the best thing to do is select it. This way it's not sending anything to pin 7. We'll send here on the bottom. We'll deploy, which means it sends the code over to the Raspberry Pi. Here it goes. Depending on how many flows you have, in which I have quite a few, it takes a little longer. If you had just this flow, it would go quite quick. And now you can see that the timestamp, even though I didn't change anything, it's still triggering, as you can see here at the bottom. And then you can see pin 7 going 1, 0, 1, 0. So give it a try and see how it works for you. This is what it looks like on one of my Raspberry Pis. I use it to make sure that NodeRed is running, because if it isn't, then there's no blinking.